Hello, everybody. This is the Stronghold Podcast, episode 13. I'm here with Dr. Alan Cheung.
Thank you very much.
How are you, man?
I'm glad to be here. Thanks very much for the invite.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Alan is a doctor. What is your sort of specialty?
I'm a orthopedic surgeon, so I'm trained in fixing broken bones, fixing sports injuries, replacing joints, pretty much that sort of thing. So, but I also have a background in sports medicine and ringside medicine as well.
So ringside medicine. So that's like a specific. There's a specific path you can go down for that.
It's mainly for people who have a sports medicine or an acute background, like emergency medicine or orthopedics. But there's a certification run by the American College of Sports Medicine, which I've taken, and I'm a member of the American Ringside Physicians Association also.
See, that's what I knew I had to get you on the podcast, because your take on this whole thing would be so interesting to find, because you train, you were telling me earlier, you're a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. You've been training for several years. You told me you trained with Ron when stick fighting 10 years ago or something like that, right?
Back in the day.
Shout out to you, Ron.
Yeah.
And Ron
Hi,
for
Ron.
the hookup as well. So you've been a martial artist for some time now.
I wouldn't say I'm particularly good, but I enjoy it, and it helps with my perspective with being a ringside doctor as well. And it was actually Ron Ong, who got me into the whole ringside thing as well. Basically,
really?
He said about 2 or 3 years ago, he said, look, they're looking for someone to cover some amateur events. So I think it was a KBX event, and so I said, okay, I'm free that evening. I'm interested to see what's going on, and it all went from there. So
Uncle
all
Ron.
down to Ron. Yeah.
Uncle Ron making the connections. So you do some ringside physician work for one. You were also doing it for the most recent SEA Games, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm in Singapore. I help cover most of the events for one championship. I'm also the wrestling team doctor. So I was out there to support them, and I also managed to support the jiu-jitsu federation as well when I was out there. So, it's first time that jiu-jitsu was an event in the SEA Games, so it's a big deal.
Which, thank God, they've finally done that. I mean, that should have been done ages ago. And the Singapore jiu-jitsu team, shout out to them. Maybe we just go into the SEA Games stuff first,
sure, yeah.
Because you were just there.
Yeah.
Did you do you do the sambo as well, the sambo?
That happened earlier on, so I didn't really have time to. That was the week previously, but they did extremely well. They got a gold and several medals as well.
Yeah, Nasri, shout out to you, gold
that's
medal.
Right, yeah, and I think that's the inaugural Sambo event, and
same thing, which is
exactly.
It's basically amateur. For the listeners that don't know, Sambo is basically amateur MMA.
Exactly,
I mean,
Russian MMA.
They can strike on the feet. They have the shin pads. They have the gloves. And you're wearing a jacket, which is particularly cool because you get this blend of the striking with the grappling, but then you can throw people on their head still because you get that collar grip, man, that collar and sleeve grip. You send people flying. So it's this hybrid MMA, gi, jiu-jitsu thing. It's really fascinating to watch because you get those judo throws in there as well, and you can still choke with the gi and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So they did fantastically well, and the wrestling team did amazingly well as well. I mean, I think they're up against
Madeline got a medal. I saw that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
shout out to Maddie.
Yeah, and so. I mean, wrestling is actually surprisingly big in the region, not just Southeast Asia, but it's actually really big in Vietnam. It's one of their national sports, and then you've got other nations who have a much larger population. So I think for athletes who are sort of have to hold down a full-time job, a lot of them are educators. They don't have sponsorship. They may get, at best, limited funding to be up against people who just can practice full-time, go on camps who go on camps to Russia for several months, and basically are very, very well funded. It's a huge achievement. So I'm very proud of them and proud to represent them medically.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wrestling was my first discipline.
Yeah.
So I have a deep, deep spot in my heart for wrestling in particular, and seeing. Especially, I mean, you have countries like Kazakhstan, right? Isn't that where they did it previously, the most recent one?
Yeah, I think for the Asian Games next year, it's going to have a lot more competition because you have all the Eastern Bloc countries and maybe even Mongolia.
They're born wrestling, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the skill, the competition level just goes right up. But even the SEA Games, it's tough. So they did really well.
Well, there's no question that martial arts in Singapore is on the rise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's across all disciplines. I don't care if it's Muay Thai, if it's jiu-jitsu, if it's sambo, if it's gi, no gi, whatever your thing is. I mean, even like the boxing that they got at Juggernaut. I mean, they got some really good boxers there, like all the way across the board.
Yeah.
And this has only been a phenomenon that's really blown up in the last 10 years. I mean, 7 or 8 years. I was just telling you earlier, when I started at Evolve, I was a purple belt, and man, there were just white and blue belts.
Yeah.
And then now if you look around, shout out to Darius, shout out to Kareem. I saw that you guys both got your black belt. I know Mark On got his black belt, I think 6 months ago. Those are guys that were blue belts when I started at Evolve. So there's this whole generation. Cal, shout out to you, Cal, GF Team JB. He just got his black belt also.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, congratulations.
So
that's
congrats
awesome.
to Cal. And all of this
Yeah.
is new, but over the next few years, I mean, man, they're going to start getting spat out like crazy.
Yeah,
you think of the SEA Games in 4 years from now, 5 years from now.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, and things are just beginning for your martial arts, particularly, like jiu-jitsu. It's going to get very big, and, I think Singapore is going to get very well known for the quality and skill level of its competitors, definitely. So,
I mean, it's interesting because I've seen it across multiple disciplines. I know Madeline Wee, she got, I think, a bronze in wrestling or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what the medal was, but I did her first trial lesson ever at the old Trifecta over there.
Okay.
So I did her very first lesson. So she's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. And
then she now medaled in the SEA Games in wrestling.
Okay.
And then there's other guys like Benjamin, who's at Newfit.
Yeah, Ben,
I was there when he first started, back when he was doing Muay Thai and had a Muay Thai fight.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And he
that's
transitioned
right.
to jiu-jitsu after that. He just got a medal.
He got a silver medal. That's right. Yes. And
Quan from Highlight Reel now. I remember rolling with him at white belt when he was at Evolve. So all of these people across several different disciplines are starting to get some serious skills, and internationally even you can start to see.
And the amazing thing is they all, not all of them are professional athletes. It's their passion. They don't get a lot of funding. They just go out and do their best and train hard and get great results. So hats off to them.
Madeline and Quan are teachers.
Yeah,
that's their full-time job.
Yeah, exactly.
They're teachers.
It's an amazing achievement from the jiu-jitsu side. 2 golds, silvers, bronzes. It's really proud of them. I was lucky enough to be there on the first day when Noah Lim got his gold. And some of the instructors as well. So there's Professor Teko from Evolve and Takeo Draculi from
Equilibrium.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they've been involved.
And Major was coaching there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
He was coaching some of the national teams.
A lot of volunteering, a lot of hard work and dedication. So, and obviously May Ui is the manager as well. So, it's a good tight team, and they'll definitely be more successful in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, what were your takeaways? I just saw the clips, right? I didn't have the pleasure of actually going there, but you saw the competition. It was 2 days, right?
Yeah, I was there for jiu-jitsu on the Monday, and then I was for watching the wrestling on the Tuesday. My takeaways is that they have achieved a tremendous amount on limited funding and sort of, a very tight budget. And if they could get more sponsorship from anyone out there who can sponsor athletes, for the SEA Games and international competitions, then, get in touch with the national associations for the sport you're passionate about, and that can only lead to great things. Yeah.
Well, I think also the performance of Singapore, especially when it comes to martial arts in general, the more that they continue to show their level, it will lead to more sponsorships and lead to more revenue. And
I mean, I think most of the athletes, they get a chance to go off on camps abroad and pick up experience and just get a different sort of take on their training. And so more of that would be good in the future. So, yeah.
I mean, they say that the national sport of Singapore is like football or something, but I'm sorry, that's bullshit, man. That is bullshit. You got one based out of Singapore. You've got an amazing jiu-jitsu culture here, amazing jiu-jitsu culture. Thousands of practitioners, thousands. I mean, from how many gyms? If you go to a jiu-jitsu competition now, the list of the different academies just goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, it's nonstop.
Yeah.
And then now with the rise, that doesn't even include boxing, kickboxing. You got wrestling now, like Sambo's in the SEA Games now. I think quickly martial arts is becoming the national sport of Singapore. Like you could say that broadly, because go to a football match in Singapore and then go to one and tell me what's busier and more exciting and who competes better on an international level.
Yeah, but I mean, Singapore's got a very unique environment, and I'd say that exams are like the national sport of Singapore. That's like their passion. You know, it's just a, you know,
it's not
just
their
an Asian
Don't make me
thing.
sad like that. It's their passion. They love taking
Not
exams.
their passion, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's a very everything's very academic here, and it's which makes, you know, winning golds at the SEA Games and, you know, that more special basically, because the environment it's not like other countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That people aren't bred into that from youth, that they're gonna, you know, and it's one of those. But that's what I love about Singapore, to be honest.
Yeah.
I love that it's like this kind of weird, nerdy, geeky culture combined with a lot of people who love to train and fight, and then they go from their teaching job to go and train jiu-jitsu in the evening, or they're doing what. That's cool. That's what I love about Singapore.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent here and a lot of dedication, that's for sure.
Yeah, and this Singapore loves games. And we were having a conversation earlier about how I think that as opposed to a Western perspective, right? Like, I mean, I grew up wrestling in America, and that shit was competitive, terrifyingly so. Like, I would get nervous every day going to practice. Like when I'm my wrestling school or my high school was ranked top 20 in the nation in wrestling every year that I was there. Yeah, and top 20 in America, to be that, you got to go hard. And those practices were fucking scary. Like honestly, like. This is a true story. The first day that I ever went to practice didn't end until someone puked. That was the standard. They put a bucket in the middle of the gym, and we started running circles. We would do bear crawls. We would do sprints. We would do run and play sprawl, get up, suicide sprints until someone puked, and then training was over. I mean, you'll go to jail in Singapore for making kids do that, right? How are you going to compete with that? That's the thing, right?
Yeah, well,
but I also
extreme. Where are you from in the States?
West Virginia.
West Virginia, okay.
So there's nothing else to do there except make 13-year-olds puke in wrestling practice, right?
I've heard it's beautiful out there. Just, great mountains and all that sort of thing.
Oh, my God. Yeah, it's a bizarre country. There's nothing to do there except drink and shoot stuff. So
okay.
But when you have that level of, when it's bred that competition, and especially something physical like that, even if it's football, American football, basketball, whatever. I mean, these guys start from the time they're so young, and for a lot of people, it's even a way out of poverty.
Exactly, you know,
things like that.
The financial incentives are definitely there, and you know, you can make a living out of it. You know, limited, but you know, definitely
quite hard here though, especially in something like this.
I just think it's in its infancy, and you know, with organizations like One, sort of raising the profile of martial arts in Asia, you know, and around the world, I think it will slowly build up. And like you said, you know, in 10 years, the landscape's going to be amazing and completely different, you know, with the skill level that's going to be there and the networks. Yeah.
So do you think, like, are you one of the believers that you sort of need that harsh environment, you know, the sort of compression makes the diamonds, right? So, I mean, okay, so give you an example, right? Let's say, you know, One has tons of Russian fighters. They have tons of Thai fighters who are world class, come from that level of poverty. Yeah. Do you think that Singapore, of course, you can get those talents. Yeah. Do you think they will be likely to produce talents of that level, given the fact that the lifestyle here is, you could say pretty clearly it's a more wealthy, more affluent lifestyle, generally speaking. Are you one of those believers that you sort of need that tough environment, or do you think the skill, I mean, One still has high quality Singaporean fighters. I mean, Amir Khan is really good, right? I mean, they still have some. Yeah. But I wonder if,
I mean,
you need that external, that rough external
environment. It's a tough question. I mean, probably they're going to be, you know, it's a bit like, you know, for Chinese families, you know, coming from a Chinese family myself, they're always going to push you to, you know, become a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, and
they got to you. You know, they got to you.
Yeah, I wanted to be an MMA fighter, and then I became a doctor instead. You know, what was I thinking? But you know, it's just that sort of Asian mentality, and you know, when you go, if you see some of the gyms in the Philippines where basically they've got nothing, but they produce like world-class athletes, you do think, exactly,
right?
So yeah, there is that, but I think, you know, every country, every culture has its strengths, and you can't expect every different sort of cultures produce the same sort of people. That's what makes different countries interesting. But you've got some great athletes here, that's for sure.
Oh, there's no question about that. And what I like again about Singapore is that people here love. It's like it's a craft, right? That's what I really like about what I was saying about the Singapore culture as it pertains to martial arts relative to how it was where I grew up. Because where I grew up, it was just a fiercely competitive thing, and it was all about explosion and power and lifting the weights to gain the power. It wasn't so much of a technique thing. Maybe it's partly because I was doing wrestling, which is a bit different than jiu-jitsu, which is much more calculated and technique-based. Not to say that they're not technical in wrestling, but the game in wrestling is short intensity, high horsepower. Of course, you still need that technique too, but not in the level of intricacies that you get when you're dealing with jiu-jitsu. And so I like that. Like here, it is like a craft. Like martial arts is a craft. People do it in their spare time, and it's a thing that they do, a skill, a path of mastery they're going down to try to hone to the highest level that their body will allow them to. You know, it's sort of detached like that, which I really like about it.
Yeah, I guess for them it's a way of life. You know, it's martial arts. It's not just going down the pub on a Saturday night and having a scrap, basically. Yeah, that's not that they would anyway, but that's a sort of, in some ways, that's the way I see the comparison between like ONE and UFC in some ways, in that like ONE seems to me more about martial arts, and then UFC seems to be more about sort of fighting. Yeah. So they're two very different organizations with two very different philosophies. So it's very interesting. And
they're marketing to two different demographics, right? Because I think that sort of the way that you just described the difference between ONE and the UFC is sort of the way I'm describing the difference in my training when I was in the US and my training in Asia.
No, I'm not sure. I mean, I've never trained in martial arts in the US, so
you could probably get the idea, though, the general idea, right? And it is kind of like that. Like it's a fighting, it's a competition, right? Whereas here, of course, it is a competition, but it's not like, I don't know, it just doesn't have that level of just aggression and just.
This is Singapore. It's you know, everyone's very polite here, and exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's my favorite. That's why I live here now. I was like, I'm out of there, man. I can't handle this. The wrestling practices are too terrifying. I need to get the hell out of there and come somewhere else that's a bit more chill. I think that's why my disposition also was more toward jiu-jitsu, because I like the fact that you can relax and you can chill out and you can just flow and you can let people work sometimes. And
do you think it's difficult to transition from wrestling to jiu-jitsu? I mean, apparently, obviously not, because wrestlers do so well. But what are the things as a ex-wrestler did you have to sort of change your mindset about?
The biggest thing is the training modality and that level of intensity, because you know jiu-jitsu's perhaps, whether it's a misnomer or not, called the gentle art, and there's some truth to that, right? At the higher levels, especially, I mean, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 15 years now, and so really in the last 5 I've understood what that meant, because even when I started, pretty much up until I became a teacher teaching jiu-jitsu, it was a competition for me. I would go to win, and I mean, I wasn't trying to be a dick or anything, but I'm trying to tap everybody out all the time. And if I'm losing, I'm fighting like hell to not lose, or to, you know, all that kind of stuff. And because wrestling is just so intense, I mean, every round that you're sparring, like coaches are yelling at you, and you're just like, it's so overwhelming. Because it's like 2 minutes and you got to go. There's never any stalling. You can't take a step back. And then you're getting yelled at the same time that you're doing this. And then you're getting smashed and crushed and tied up. And you're just like, oh, my God. It's so much sensory overload, right? In jiu-jitsu, you have way more time. It's like 5, 7, 8 minutes to work.
Sure.
You have to start and you have to stop and you have to rest and you have to go. And, you know, you injure people if you train jiu-jitsu like you train wrestling.
I'm sure.
You know, if I do think of a blast double or something, right? Like if I do a blast double leg and try to take you down, imagine the amount of energy it requires to do that. Imagine trying to put that same amount of energy into an arm bar. Like even just the step over, even if you don't explode your hips, but if you just blast into it with that same, you injure people even if you don't mean to. Right? And it's sort of that. It's changing that, so you know that in jiu-jitsu, it's a lot of start and stop, rest, explode, rest, explode. But the overall level of intensity is significantly lower than in wrestling, because you got 2 minutes in wrestling. That's it. 2 minutes, 3 periods. Like,
because the first thing that people do in wrestling is they try and go to their front and they give up their back, basically, because they don't want to get pinned and lose the match.
That's, of course, the biggest technical difference, right, is that you can't be on your back. So there's the training and how you actually approach the training itself, but, of course, the technical difference is the guard. That's the big one.
And then sort of going from taking them down, sweeping them, to moving to submission, which you don't maybe not do in most forms of wrestling.
Did you ever wrestle? Did you ever
no way.
Do you ever start your rolls on your feet? That's my next. Are you a guard puller? What are you doing?
Well, I'm kind of.
You're a filthy guard puller.
I'm the Masters League now, so that's right. So I kind of, you know, just go easy, and you know, don't want to be seen as a guard puller, but I just think in some ways it's like easiest way to avoid getting injuring yourself.
Well, the number one way to get injured is falling body weight, right? Which is that's what wrestling is. Involuntarily having your weight fall to the ground, right? So guard pulling is definitely, as you get older, the better move.
Yeah.
But you can also, as you train more, relax as you wrestle.
Yeah.
And the way that you would think of like having maybe a chill roll with somebody that you know, that you trust, that you train with, that you know maybe the levels are same, but they're not going to hurt you, right? You can do that with wrestling too, but not as a beginner because it's so explosive.
It is,
But as you get higher up the levels, you can chill out too and concede takedowns. Like that was the thing that I couldn't do when I was younger. It was like I could not give up a takedown. Right now, it's like if I have to fight fiercely, give up a takedown, and maybe I'm going to hurt my back, or maybe I'm just going to go down.
Yeah.
You know. I'll just let it happen. go to the next thing, right? I'm not going to fight so hard.
That's all right,
You gotta keep training.
Lost the ego, that's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a big step you make in martial arts is once you lose that, you can still have it at times, but you also just accept the fact that you don't have to win every single exchange, right?
Yeah.
You ever do any Muay Thai or striking?
A little bit, I mean, it's incredibly like aerobic and, physically demanding, but I thought I'd try and concentrate on one thing at a time, and but I do enjoy Muay Thai when I do it. But it's the skill level I'd see sometimes is incredible in conditioning, and it's a fierce sport.
Well, the training for that one is quite different too, because like in jiu-jitsu, even if you're chill, you can pretty much always try to win. Yeah. And you can go somewhere near as hard as you can with some control and still everybody's safe, right? Yeah. But if you do like Muay Thai or MMA sparring, you just can't beat the shit out of your training partner nonstop, right? No, exactly. You have to let them work, or you're going to scare people away. The training becomes unfun. Your training partner is going to hate sparring with you, especially in MMA, right? Like if you do MMA training, here's a really good analogy. If I get you in the mount, right, I can be there for like 5 minutes trying to choke you or trying to armbar you or trying to take your back, and that's a totally normal situation, right? But if I mount you in MMA and I sit there and I punch you for 5 straight minutes, you're going to be like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this is awful, right? So just in that sense, you have to let people work, because nobody will train with that guy if they just mount you, pin your arms down, punch you like you're a 3-year-old, just pinning your arms down,
Yeah. It's got to be fun. I mean, these guys most of us are not like professional athletes, so there's got to be some level of enjoyment and learning involved. Yeah, it's
the trick for me is the optimum level of difficulty.
Yeah,
you ever hear Faraz Zahabi talks about that? He talks about like you don't want to hit the flow state, right? That should be the ultimate goal of your training session, because if you hit the flow state, the time flies by. You're having you're having a good time, and you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're in the moment and you're reacting naturally, right? And everybody's hit that spot, and then time teleports by, and the end of it, all of your stress is gone. You're not thinking about your job. You're not thinking about your life or this or that or your girlfriend or your wife or whatever the hell it is.
You've got the buzz, the endorphin high. You've learned something, and you're fit but not exhausted. Yeah, true.
And you have to get rid of the things that block the flow state, right? And the first one, generally, in my experience, is the cardio level. That's the baseline. If you come in and you're so tired in the first couple minutes, you're going to be so fatigued that you can't sit into the flow state, right? So that's the first thing. Once you have the cardio down, and that first hurdle's over, the next one is like the level of difficulty. You have to be optimally challenged. If it's too hard, you're going to get sucked out of the flow state because nothing you're doing is going to work. If it's too easy, it's not challenging enough to get the reward that you want. So you need the fitness first, and then you need to have that optimal level of difficulty. And if your coach can foster that so that you're in it most of the time, for me, that's my strategy for like retaining students, is they have to hit that as much as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think you've been teaching. Congratulations as well on the Stronghold opening.
Oh, thanks, man.
And I mean, you've been an instructor for quite a while now, and you used to be a teacher. Is that right?
Yeah, I used to be a teacher.
So you know the principles of education. But was there anything you did differently when you kind of opened Stronghold, or you thought you'd try differently with your students, or just as your own sort of baby or business,
Well, the business aspect of it was totally new to me. Yeah. So that was the biggest difference. But then trying to distinguish myself in this environment is the real trick, right? Because there's so many gyms in Singapore already. Yeah. They're already quite competitive. So finding those ways to distinguish myself in a market of already very high quality instructors, and
absolutely,
that's the trick for me. So figuring out, approaching it from the teaching perspective is where I try and distinguish myself, because you have how many world champions, you have how many black belts, world class competitors, all that kind of stuff. But even in my experience, you don't really have too many people who focus almost entirely on teaching the thing itself, right? You have a lot of competitors that do it as a job. And then even like all the old coaches that I would do, I mean, their focus was always like teaching and training so that they could pay for their competitions. I'm not like that at all. My sole focus is on teaching what I'm trying to do and figuring out both the way to communicate these ideas clearly, and then of course make sure that my students that I already have in come back.
Yeah.
And that's the trick, is actually the communication of the material in a way that's easy to get from the students, you know.
That's good.
But it's a crazy it's
an experience, and
it is an experience.
Having opened my own business like about 15 months ago, I sympathize. It's like,
what are you doing for your business?
Well, it's just basically set up my own brand and you know, just marketing myself, and you know, as an orthopedic surgeon, and you know, all the ringside stuff is a kind of really added a huge extra dimension to my life.
Are you tying that into your business as well?
I do it mainly for enjoyment, actually. I think if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it. But you know, being a surgeon is my main profession. But I've got you know, I really enjoy martial arts and interacting with athletes and sort of learning the art as well. And it's really sort of expanded, you know, my mindset and, you know, working with one, and, you know, I'm very grateful.
Is this something that you foresaw happening, or is this something you kind of fell into and then it was just something that you became very passionate about? Did you pursue it, or was it just a sort of happy accident that you...
It was a sort of happy accident as well. You know, I thought it'd be interesting to cover a few amateur fights. And so for about a year, I covered probably most of the amateur events in Singapore until I realized that it was actually involved a high element of risk, because the safety processes were perhaps, you know, with the budgets involved and the number of people on the ground, if anything went wrong, it potentially put you at a fair amount of danger that you couldn't do your best for the athlete.
You individually at risk, you mean, like as the physician, or?
Well, let me give you an example. I think I was covering the Singapore Fighting Championships on one night, and basically that went fine. There were no problems. And then basically the news came over that an athlete had unfortunately passed away in the ring. Do you remember that the bodybuilder at that event? And I just thought, wow, you know, I'd offered to cover that event, but they'd actually sort of turned me down. And so, you know, and then there, for the grace of God, you know, maybe who knows, maybe I couldn't have made a difference, but it really struck home how you really need a kind of a good layer of safety to cover martial arts events. And that's why, you know, working with one, they've got the safest processes in martial arts in Asia, if not the world, when it comes to sort of medical standards and working with a team and equipment and so on and so forth. So I'm very happy to be working with them.
Yeah, that Stephen Lim fight where that fellow passed away was a real shame.
Yeah.
Because I really don't think that was even... That happened because that guy was not in fight shape.
No, absolutely not. No, I mean
they should not have signed off for him to be able to do that.
Yeah.
People think that this is game, and he was just not. Yeah. First of all, he wasn't well trained, and he was not conditioned enough. That was just exhaustion.
Yeah.
To the point where it took his life, unfortunately. And this is, you know, this sort of celebrity culture, because this guy is like a YouTuber, and they built it up as this sort of like Logan Paul, KSI type thing, but in Singapore.
Yeah, he looks strong, but he had not. There's a different sort of strength and endurance level required. But I think there's been a lot of sort of. It's a few years ago now, and there's been a lot of reporting and a lot of words being said about that. But it's very sad for his family. And
of course, no, I mean it's really sad. Yeah. But this is what happens if you don't respect what's going on, and you think it's a game. Because even though, you know, concussions, getting knocked out, like, of course, that's a serious concern. Yeah. But, I mean, you've seen this happen a few times. That was the guy that Kimbo Slice fought, that Dada 5000 guy. Did you ever see that? I mean, that guy had, like, 3 heart attacks in the hospital after the fight because he was just so exhausted. And then he ended up dying shortly after that.
Well, you know, I think that's what I'm kind of surprised about this recent sort of Nate Diaz, Masvidal, all this kind of hoo-ha about, you know, because if you have a decent ringside doctor who can basically step in, and then the referees also play a huge part in recognizing when an athlete is at risk of further damage, not be able to defend themselves. and you've got to respect that. And I'm very it's very perturbing because the doctor, regarding this recent UFC competition where the doctor stepped in and stopped the BMF fight, so it was a doctor stoppage, and basically he's receiving death threats and all sorts of bad mouthing. I mean, that's just horrendous for the sport in general, really. But
what was your take on the cut?
Well, I think reading the interviews afterwards with Dr. Sethi, who's a very well respected member of the ringside physician community, and he's also sort of the head of the New York Athletic State Commission, so he's not an amateur by any standards, he's very experienced. Basically, he said he didn't make the judgment to stop the fight on the basis of the cut alone. He was basically watching the athletes all the way through for those 3 rounds and assessing him all the time and his ability to defend himself. And that's the thing. We can all be armchair.
You mean like damage accumulated up to that point as well?
Absolutely. I think
he was getting a bit of a beat down.
There was an early knockdown in the first round, and what you can see on the screen is probably only around maybe 30-40% of what really happens.
Yeah.
You can be an armchair judge, be an armchair doctor, or armchair referee, but unless you're actually in the ring with someone, ask them questions, watching how they're moving, how they're responding, are their eyes glazed over, are they, do you think they'll be able to defend themselves? And if you think they're getting to the state where something bad is going to happen, then I don't think it was really just in the cut alone, because so I think there are a variety of factors involved which he's not able to discuss because it's sort of patient confidentiality. But I think it's terrible the way that certain fight fans are sort of rounded on him. I mean,
that guy did not deserve that for sure.
Yeah, it's a sport. It's not a death match. There's got to be rules, and there's got to be respect for the officials.
Well, most likely that doctor saved Nate Diaz from several more concussions because that fight was going down. It was going down quick. He got dropped hard with a body kick. I mean, some of those body kicks were just slamming in. He was starting to get on the tail end of a pretty big beatdown anyway, and it would have been. Everybody liked to say that, Nate comes on in the 4th and 5th round, but it was not getting better. It was getting worse as time went on.
Yeah.
And if you think about the amount of strikes he would have taken just to that cut alone, let alone the concussive blows to the head,
sure.
He was getting his body beat up. But to threaten that doctor is just absolutely crazy. This is what happens if you put the word motherfucker on a belt. you leave nothing but like chaos for the people that are like, yes. Blood, death, kill. And
that's why I don't usually watch the UFC, because I just think it doesn't really attract me. The whole sort of, not all of the athletes are like that, but some of the thuggery involved, or the showboating, or the trash talking, or the behavior that goes on outside. It's not a good role model for me, or for children. I think Whereas at least I think one is basically promoting martial arts as a better way of life, and has got values of discipline, integrity, respect, and so on, which really ties in what I think martial arts should be. It's not just about in the ring, but it's how you act and present yourself outside, and how you interact with other people, rather than try and trash talk your way out of a situation.
Yeah, one doesn't glorify the sort of lesser qualities that are inherent with fighting, the ego and the violence and the aggression and all that kind of stuff.
I've never encountered any sort of aggression or ill discipline from any of the athletes or officials, so everyone is very respectful, and it's a great place to work.
Well, if they did that fight in Asia, I mean, that reaction would not have happened.
Absolutely not.
I've been to fights, I've seen fights in the United States, I've seen them in Canada, I've seen them overseas, I've seen them in Asia, I've seen them in here, I've seen them in Kuala Lumpur, I've been probably 8 countries I've seen fights in. And only the U.S. and Canada do I go to these fights, and then I hear people just like, kick him in the balls, punch him in the face. Just this stupid shit that these drunk people are screaming, booing fighters who are fighting really hard. Yeah. Right? I mean, these people in the stands don't even know what they're talking about to boo these guys because they're not being aggressive enough or violent enough or not doing it. It's like they don't even understand. And to boo them when they're in there with a trained killer for your entertainment for not as much money as they should be getting, and then to boo them at their work, only Americans, man. Like Canadians, Americans, Brazil does a fair good job of that too. They have the worst one. They tell people to die. That chant that they do in Brazil,
all right, okay.
It's literally just tells people to die. So it gets a little crazy when you get in the Americas. But one thing I love about Asia is they really value the technique. If you go to like a one fight, if a leg kick lands, people will start to applaud, right?
I think they
recognize a clean strike.
Exactly. They're there for the skill and the atmosphere and the excitement, but they're not yelling abuse or, well.
The only time you hear that is like the white dude. It's like drunk in the audience. The one American sitting in the audience that's had a little too many. Or Ron. Ron does his fair share of that too when he gets a little drunk at the one fights. Did you? Okay, so what do you think about that Masvidal fight? Would you? I mean, to your knowledge, would you think that that's a good stoppage, or would you be more inclined to let him go on?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think it's not really. I mean, with that laceration alone, you don't make the decision on that. You're basically assessing, as a ringside doctor, there's so many variables involved. But
it's the entirety of the
entirety, absolutely. He's basically watching him, see how many blows to the head he's got, what to the body, is he moving, are his head injuries affecting his ability to coordinate himself and his balance and defend himself? Does he actually want to be in the ring? Is he able to listen to his trainer between the bouts? Does he know where he is? All these sort of things are sort of all the things that we can't see as necessarily, and it's very obvious as watching from the TV. You've got to be there and speaking to the athlete and sort of watching them very carefully. And it's not just the cut, absolutely not. And he's a very well-respected ringside doctor. He's very experienced. He's probably one of the top ringside doctors in the world. So I think I respect his opinion and his judgment.
I mean, the thing is, the fighters want to go on, right?
They always do.
Of course they always do, right? Yeah. That's their game. But well, here's an interesting contrast because today they just did the UFC. Yeah. They just had the big 3 title fights. Amanda Nunes fought Durandamy, and then Max Holloway fought Volkanovski, and then Usman fought Colby Covington. And interestingly, Colby broke his jaw in the 3rd round, right? So from a punch or something like that, ended up getting a broken jaw. Yeah. Fought on for 2 more rounds. Sure. And then I would suspect because of the broken jaw, took a straight right and then fell down and the guy finished him with strikes. So something like that, it's not quite as visible, right? But I mean, he would have taken tons of shots onto that broken jaw. And then I think you could make a pretty good argument that if his jaw wasn't broken, he probably would have had the ability to finish that fight. And the fight was close. It was 2-2, 2 rounds to 2 rounds, maybe going into the 5th round. So what would you think about something like that? A fighter continuing to fight for 10 more minutes with a broken jaw, just taking those shots. I mean, that's something that doesn't have the visual quite like a large cut, but that's a problem, if you're in there.
I think...
Unfortunately, I
didn't have time to catch that fight, but I would say that sometimes with most fights, if there's a fracture, and you felt that the athlete couldn't defend themselves, then you would stop that fight.
They mentioned it in between the rounds too. Colby said that his jaw was broken in between, I think, the 3rd and the 4th round.
Okay, well,
would it be typical for a physician to step in and stop that at that point?
I think it would happen in most situations. I don't know who the doctor was covering that event, or
they were in Vegas, whether
exactly whether it's because it's the main event, they think they've got that pressure to they've been pressured to not stop the fight, that sort of thing, so it's a very, but in most circumstances, if an athlete breaks their jaw, then you would stop the fight. I think most ringside doctors would agree that's a sensible and a safe thing to do.
Which is interesting because I can't think of a single time I've seen it. I can't think of a single time I've seen a fight. I've seen people get finished because of a jaw break, like similar to that. Like they had a broken jaw, they got punched in the jaw and then went down. Same thing with a broken nose. I don't know if you ever saw that. Robbie Lawler, Rory McDonald fight, the second one, was one of the most brutal fights ever. Sure. And just the accumulation to damage on his broken nose, and then he just got popped one time, and then the eyes fill up with tears, and then he just went down, and it was just accumulation of damage onto a broken nose. Yeah. But I can't think of a time where, like, for example, someone said in between the rounds, my jaw's broken, and then a doctor coming in and stopping it. I mean, I agree with you that that's most likely that person's going to lose. Yeah. I mean, if they get hit a couple times, how are you supposed to withstand the pain and the damage?
I'm surprised they let him go on but like I said, I didn't catch that fight, and I'm surprised as an athlete he didn't try and most people try and hide their injuries. So by saying I've broken my jaw, basically, is he trying to say please stop the fight, or because he's saying I'm injured?
I think he was just saying that just saying it, because I've never heard of a guy saying like, "Oh, my jaw's broken," and then the doctor going in after the fact and stopping it. I mean, I've never seen that. You can definitely ask for a way out. Like if you're like, my jaw's broken, I'm done. Then of course that's fine, right? Mm-hmm. But if you did that in America, they're probably just going to say that you're weak or some nonsense like that anyway. So
yeah, well, I think I think he's a bit of a character, Covington, and he stars himself as the supervillain of the UFC. So I guess, maybe there's some cosmic karma.
Yeah. Well, people were paying to watch him lose more than anything. So he wrote a check that his brain had to cash in his jaw, I guess, because I think a lot of people were quite happy that he ended up losing that fight. He talked a lot of shit. Yeah. A lot of shit going into that fight. So I think I mean, that's the thing. If you're going to talk that game. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's a hell of a fighter. That was a good fight. It was really, really competitive. He was 1 or 2 minutes away from potentially being the champion. Yeah. But accumulation, that jaw fracture, and then he got knocked down. There was only 1 minute left. 1 minute left in the fight. So they had fought for 24 minutes. And but that's the way it goes sometimes. Yeah, indeed. So I wanted to get at least your medical advice on it. We're just talking some shit here, but I wanted to get a little bit of your medical opinion. And I had a guy email me who asked me to speak to you about grappling, like specifically head damage to grapplers, and what your thoughts are on that. Because typically you think of, everybody knows that if you're doing boxing or if you're doing Muay Thai, taking damage to the head is a real problem. Yeah. And you want to mitigate that as much as possible. But what would your take be on like grappling or wrestling or something like that?
Well, in general, particularly at an amateur level, if you consider the amount of bouts that go on, even in just Singapore, there's probably like hundreds of bouts of sparring that go on every day. You're talking about what, head injuries or injuries in general to the...
specifically in this case, let's talk about head injuries.
Okay. Well, in general, it's actually very, very safe in the kind of environment that we practice in. And as someone who sees a lot of concussions from other sports like rugby, I see a ton of people who come in with head injuries from, contact sports.
Well, football, like heading a ball even. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the actual injury rates from other sports is much, much higher than most martial arts. Really? That's in terms of certain types of injury, like horse riding, for example, anything involving a horse, falling off a horse, you're going to break something if you fall off that horse potentially. So but people don't think of it as a violent sport, even though injury rate is potentially higher.
It's that falling body weight.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe with grappling as well, it doesn't involve striking unless it's involuntary or someone needs you accidentally in the head. So you tend to not get a lot of concussions or that sort of type of injuries with the other impact sports. So with regards to and hardly ever do I. Anecdotally, in the past, people used to get choked unconscious now, but most people are pretty sensible and tap out before they lose consciousness and don't have that ego.
Well, that's a good thing. I hope you don't mind me interrupting, just to go into that point a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so I've seen people choked out. Yeah. I don't even know how many times at this point. Right? Been choked out a few times myself. Yeah. Are there any damages to that? I've heard various sort of urban legends about, you have to choke somebody for this long after they're unconscious to actually cause them damage. Is there any long-term damage to being choked out occasionally? And then what's that line? What's a safe zone for before you would actually have some sort of bodily damage from being choked unconscious?
I think that the data is probably not really there. But anecdotally, you just don't get... for example, we all have this term for boxers being called punch drunk when they get older, or it's called pugilistic dementia. And that is from kind of being repeatedly punched in the head in training or competition, getting concussion, kind of build up over the years to perhaps this thing which is called kind of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. But you don't really, who hears of grapplers or jiu-jitsu athletes having, brain damage from being choked? You never, have we ever met someone, with that? No, we haven't, or we've not really heard of it. It's not really a phenomenon. So if there is damage from being choked out, you hear rare case reports of, people, one in however many 100,000 of injuries to some arteries or blood vessels in the brain, which can sometimes cause damage. But often, I suspect that these people are slightly older and they have pre-existing conditions in their carotid arteries, like a plaque which can dislodge. But in general, if you consider the amount of sparring that goes around the world, and there are very few case reports of brain damage from, if any. I couldn't, if you search on it on the medical database, I bet you wouldn't find a single one of brain damage from being choked out.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it myself tons of times.
Yeah.
Is there? My estimation was that it would probably need to be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20 to 30 seconds of like an extended choke post unconscious to really threaten somebody's life or give them but that's a long time, man. If you're limp, like that's so unrealistic. I mean, just a few seconds you feel it. Like
I think in the scheme of things, grappling arts and from that perspective, and jiu-jitsu is very, very safe. I don't think you're going to get brain damage from your average sort of scenario, basically. So I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about. All sports, excuse me, have an inherent risk of injury, and that's what makes them exciting. But I don't think that's one of the major risks of participating in a grappling sport.
So then let's segue a little bit into the sort of more striking discipline.
Yeah.
Because what I'm really concerned with, and I think most of the listeners of this podcast are going to be your sort of average Joe people who have their day job and they like to train in their free time. Mm-hmm. Of course, the risks of taking a fight and the concussive blows and living down that career path, and then the really intense training that you need to do to get to that point, of course, can lead to some problems that you may have with some sort of CTE or whatever the case may be if you choose to go down that road. But what about somebody that's more of a hobbyist? Yeah. But maybe they're like me. Like I do Muay Thai sparring 3 or 4 times a week. I'm taking very little headshots, but I'm taking some, right? But they're never hard enough to like sit me down. It would be as hard as me just getting a glove and then kind of just going like that, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not even close. I don't get headaches.
I don't think that's quite the same. I mean,
10 years of that, you think? As long as it's controlled.
Okay. Well, if we look at a sport where you do get can potentially get, a concussion maybe quite often, like rugby, for example. So I cover a lot of rugby matches in Singapore, and there's a lot of kind of awareness about concussion, and so they basically have very kind of strict criteria about, spotting it and taking people off the field and being assessed, and then automatically sort of being rested for 2 or 3 weeks. And once you have your concussion symptoms are completely cleared, then you still have 2 weeks where you have a kind of graduated return to play. So I think the world rugby is sort of streets ahead of any other sport in terms of management of concussion and trying to prevent any sort of further head injury in the long term. I think there's, in the NFL, it's probably litigation led in terms of what they're going to do. Like people are actively avoiding retiring early or avoiding sending their kids to play, American football because of the fear of this phenomenon called CTE, which is still undergoing a lot of research, or getting brain damage in later life. In terms of martial arts, I think that, if you did get a blow to the head, and, the best thing to do is basically, there are some red flags, which we always warn athletes about, that they should always see a physician. You should basically have someone with you for the next 48 hours after you've had a head injury, and if you start vomiting, getting more drowsy so you can't be roused, lose consciousness, have seizures, problems with your eyesight, then you should go straight to the emergency department. And at least, the problem with concussion is that some of the symptoms aren't, they also affect your mood and emotions and ability to concentrate. And so it's good to see someone who's actually perhaps, a neurologist who's actually trained in that, or a sports physician like myself who's actually trained in concussion management, so they can sort of make a proper assessment and send you for the necessary tests if possible. Because the fear is that, if you get a head injury, you get a bleed to the brain, that bleed can sort of expand, and sometimes rarely result in sort of death. So that's why it's not something to be taken lightly, and if you have repeated concussions, that can add up over a lifetime. But I think just someone tapping on the chin every now and then, probably, it's unlikely that unless you have concussive symptoms afterwards, like you feel like you can't concentrate, you've got a persistent headache, or there's a long list of symptoms, it's probably unlikely to hopefully cause you long-term damage, particularly if you're wearing headgear. Yeah.
What's that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Well, let me get one thing, and then I want to go back to the headgear, because the Olympics recently banned it, so I'd like to get your take on that. But before we get to that, what do you think about what's a typical concussion protocol? How long would you advise someone to go without training, without any contact, sort of? Because I'll give you an example. I have one of my Fred's students had a fight recently. Yeah. He came in and trained with me over the weekend. And he got knocked out in his fight, and I mean he was on the mats like 4 or 5 days later. Yeah. And he's like, oh yeah, but it's just rolling. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I think you probably shouldn't be doing anything. Like just rest take a couple weeks of no contact, because I was like, man, sometimes you sit up in a butterfly guard, you get headbutted, like someone takes you down, they accidentally fall the weight, your head hits the mat, like even little stuff like that. I'm very concerned about any sort of injuries in my training. So what's a typical concussion protocol? And then like, what would you recommend for like no contact if you even have these symptoms, generally speaking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that it really varies between sports and disciplines. There's some sports and some kind of organizations like One and World Rugby, which have very good, very strict sort of protocols or mandatory suspensions or kind of protocols, and other sports, most sports out there haven't really sort of tapped into this issue of concussion. So I think at the very least you shouldn't train until all your concussive symptoms have basically disappeared, so, and sometimes that can take several days or weeks or months for that to dissipate. And then if you're talking about, and then basically you should see a physiotherapist who sort of is able to, again, it's difficult with martial arts because there's so many different ways of practicing martial arts, and not sort of a standard approach. But, for example, if in a sport which involves contact like rugby, then they've got a graduated return to play protocol. So basically you start doing...
How long would that generally be?
That would take about 2 weeks, at least minimum 2 weeks after all your concussive symptoms have stopped, and then with 24 hours between sort of going between one stage to another, so like going from light aerobic exercise to doing some sport-specific drills, and then doing full contact drills. So the whole process can take sort of minimum 3 weeks, that sort of thing.
That still seems fast to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm inclined to think that if you get... I mean, I guess MMA was probably different than the concussions you get. But, I mean, if I saw a student of mine that got, like, let's say, a one-punch knockout or a head kick knockout or something, I mean, I'm thinking 6 months.
Well, there is
maybe contact a month or two in, but actually before a fight or something, I mean, geez, I would think that...
In terms of the kind of the general consensus, there is a American Ringside Physician Association concussion consensus statement, and then in that they lay out sort of a whole list of mandatory sort of suspension periods for athletes who have basically either a TKO or a KO, and that can range really from sort of and the number of number of TKOs that they've had, so that can really range from 30 days to even 2 years. So that's they've a whole panel of experts and neurologists have sat down and sort of thought it out. So it's
based on the severity of the...
Yeah, exactly, on the number of head injuries you've had over a period of time, and sort of level of and how it was sustained. So it's a very kind of very sort of grey area in martial arts, unfortunately, but there is a consensus statement, and the minimum you should do is basically definitely not train while you have any sort of symptoms related to a head injury, and if you have any concern at all, to go and see a doctor. And with those red flags I mentioned earlier, if you have any of those or your friend has any of those, just go straight to the emergency department. Yeah. Okay,
so let's get back to this this headgear thing, because to me this is quite interesting, because you mentioned that you think earlier, just kind of in a second, that you thought the headgear would help. Now, interestingly, the Olympics just banned it for amateur boxing. The IOC decided that the headgear was causing more problems than they were helping, and I think their rationale, and actually I've observed this too. I mean, of course, it's just anecdotal and just seeing it, but I have noticed in my years of training that when you wear the headgear, it's basically a license to be an asshole and just to throw harder, right? It's like, if people see that, they're like, oh, now I can punch way harder because you're protected and you're safe. So I guess I could see the argument that assuming the levels of control during the sparring were the same, that the headgear would soften the blows. If let's say I never go higher than 60% power.
Yeah.
If I can guarantee that without a headgear and I can guarantee it with a headgear, all things the same, the headgear would probably be preventative. But there's something about the psychology of seeing that poofy thing on someone's head where you're like, I can really wrap my kick up there hard and you'll be fine.
I think there's a ARP or American Ringside Physicians consensus statement on the headgear, and basically they're kind of on their discussions, they felt that headgear should be worn during sort of competition, and basically, I know it's in other sports again it's a bit of a grey area. In rugby, headgear has been shown not to really prevent concussion, so that maybe you're right. There's a false sense of security if you had headgear for whatever reason, anecdotally, friends of mine who do boxing saying they find it harder to sort of slip and bob and weave with this big bulky thing on the head. But overall, the consensus statement is that it should be worn as at least some layer of protection against head injury.
Yeah, and the other thing, I get it for sure. The other thing that tends to happen with the headgear is that you tend to undervalue defense. And this is, if you ever watch the Olympic boxing, like before they had headgear and then after, those guys swing hard. If you watch Olympic heavyweight boxing, those guys are just windmilling punches. Compare that to a heavyweight. This could be for a gold medal, mind you, talented guys. Compare that with even a mid-level professional boxing fight where they don't wear headgear. The level of defense and how they have to protect themselves is so much more higher valued when you're wearing when you're not wearing a headgear than when you are. Yeah, I think it's those kinds of arguments that led the Olympics to get rid of them, but I think it remains to be seen because this is the first one coming up, the upcoming Olympics, where they're going to enforce that rule. Yeah. So it sort of remains to be seen whether it's a good thing or not. I tend to favor the thing that makes the defense more highly valued than the offense. And I think there's something to be said about the fact that those people just wing those punches hard because they don't have to worry so much about what's coming back. Yeah. But I really don't know.
Well, there's basically positional statements there from ringside physicians, and they basically say wear the head guard, wear the protection. It provides some protection, may not defend everything, but it's there for a reason. And maybe looking at the overall, we're not all Olympic athletes, so maybe it's good to have some sort of level of protection if you're an accountant or a lawyer or someone out there who likes to spar.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to know if I think, that's true. And I definitely think that for me, it's all about the environment that you train in. Yeah. Because I'm saying everything basically on the assumption that people will just go harder when they have headgear on, which is what I've observed, but should not be the case.
I'm not sparring you with you, right? That's for sure.
I don't do that, man. Listen, I always chill out. I pull everything back. Actually, I get quite annoyed because in the last 3 years that I've been doing this I've been doing it full time for like four or 5 years, but injuries happen when I'm not at the gym, and it really upsets me because just a couple days ago, someone got injured. I get a first off day in months, and then someone gets injured. And I'm just like, shit, because my basic job here as the coach is just to enforce security and safety, because that's my biggest concern. If people want to come back and they want to keep training, I have to make sure everybody's safe. And if your gym has a reputation for injuries, that gets around.
Well, I think I'm sure that you do enforce it and basically keep it safe and sensible, because at the end of the day, you don't want no one wants their students to go home injured. They want them to enjoy it and get a sense of achievement and build and keep training. And my jiu-jitsu classes, I'm always grateful that they do watch out for us, because how you can have a range of athletes from 6'4" to a kind of 4 foot something kind of lady. So they try and match them up between skill levels and basically stamp down on any sort of crazy behavior. So I'm very grateful to my professors for basically trying to keep us safe but competitive. Yeah. So,
if you get those 20-year-old 3 month into jiu-jitsu white belts that are jacked,
I'm sure
you got a problem on your hands.
That's what they say, isn't it? That the white belts are the most dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely. Right, really, especially the athletic, strong, competitive ones. Yeah. Maybe been training only within less than 6 months. Once you get them to blue belt, generally there's I think the level of safety increases substantially. But those athletic young 20-something teenagers that for the first 3 months of jiu-jitsu, you gotta be careful.
I'd like to think I was one of those, but I think I was just uncoordinated. So sorry to any of my training partners.
Okay, so we hit up the head injuries.
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about the below the neck,
below the belt. Yeah.
Right. I mean, honestly, the biggest concern for me is, of course, the head trauma, because I mean, you can do nowadays modern medicine. You can do great stuff to the below the neck part that you can't quite do for the above the neck part yet. So I think when it comes to boxing and striking disciplines, you really got to be aware of the head contact. Yeah. And then I think with the grappling, you got to be quite concerned below the neck, particularly the neck, the spine, the back, and the knees, and the shoulders. Yeah. Those tend to be the problems that I see a lot of people deal with. And, especially those back, knee, and neck injuries, those things will put you out for a year. You tear an ACL or something like that, that is not, that's a long time to recover. And then you also risk re-injury, and that is not pleasant stuff. So, what's your take on what do you do to sort of, or recommend other people do if you can't follow it yourself, to sort of mitigate these particularly problematic areas, the neck, the knees, the back? I think in general, like the risk of injury is low, and overall it's a relatively safe sport compared to something like horse riding, for example, surprisingly. But I think that the first thing to do is basically just kind of kind of look at who you're training with. Like you said, if it's a young 20-something white belt who's got something to prove, then you might want to say, well, look, maybe I'll just sit this round out. Or your ego as well is something, I'm sure as an instructor, you're trying to say to people, look, just tap out. You don't have to kind of resist until you fall unconscious, or if you feel that you've lost that position. I feel, maybe I tap out too easily because I'm kind of, I just think, it's not, you're there to learn something. And if you're in a position where you can't progress, or you're beyond that position, or then just give up gracefully, basically, and start all over again, and try better next time. That's the great thing about, jiu-jitsu, just you keep learning, but it's sort of full contact. Yep. Every tap is just a reset, right?
Exactly.
Let's go again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and then in terms of like, like you said, conditioning, body conditioning is very important. So stretching before and after, getting your fitness up to a decent standard, so you're not just sort of gassing out, conserving your energy, and then sort of not leaving your arms and legs lying around to be sort of twisted around is very important. So I always use that kind of like cougar grip, monkey grip type thing. I never kind of have my hands out like that anymore. Yeah,
because the fingers are another one.
Exactly.
That's
quite, so I just,
especially as a surgeon, right? You got to keep those things clean and protected.
So I tape them up like crazy, and I use the cougar grip, and I try not to use spider guard and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
I don't play that anymore. Yeah, I hurt my knee and of course, your hands and your shoulders and everything. But I popped my knee 2 times doing a lasso guard. Yeah, because it puts a lot of that pressure on the outside of your knee when you wrap the foot into the lapel, as people start to give a lot of pressure and everything. Yeah. So I don't do any of the crazy. The only time I grab the sleeves like that is like to recover something, or to hold off something. But I'm rarely playing those games where I'm pulling and stretching my legs. And another one that I see a lot of, maybe get your take on this: people inverting the guard. You ever see people do that upside down? Toes over their head. This is a really trendy style of jiu-jitsu nowadays, and I warn people a lot, because some people will spend rounds with people 20 kilos heavier than them on their head, legs in inverted guard, just playing there the whole time. And I'm like, listen, man, if you put that kind of stress on your neck and your lower back and you're playing that guard all the time.
Well, luckily for me, I'm not that skillful, so I think I could actually achieve
You're
that.
aware of what it is, right, when you invert like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things is just to listen to your body, because I have people who say, I train 6 or 7 times a week. And to me, that is like, if you're experienced and you know how to pace yourself, and then basically like you're able to recover, that's great. Because I think a lot of these things are, someone picks up a bit of a twinge, bit of an injury, and then sort of the next time around it can potentially sort of worsen or tear or something like that. So I think giving yourself time to recover and rest is really, really important as well. Especially when you're kind of more senior, I suppose, is the term.
Yeah, I mean, longevity with training is one of my major focuses.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about sort of like leaving your limbs out and tapping early and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really important, and nobody wants to do it because the ego gets in the way.
Yeah.
But basically what happens is the longer you train, it increases your overall awareness, both on how far can my joint go before it breaks or how long can I defend this choke before I pass out. That's the extreme example, of course. But more likely is like exactly when to tap before maybe it's not going to break, but it's going to be a little stiff tomorrow. Yeah. Same thing, like, okay, can my neck support this sort of position? How much can I fight off with my knee sideways, like even that rubber guard or something like that puts that extreme pressure on the outside of your knee. Triangles, I've seen people try to put triangles on big people, pop their knees because they're squeezing so hard. Like all of these sort of little things that you can do in jiu-jitsu, the longer you train, it increases your awareness of how long you can hold off, how much resistance you should do, and just of course, tap early. Don't wrestle so hard. Don't explode into double legs, right? Like, chill out in those areas, and it will just increase the amount of time you can train exponentially.
I mean, I think the ultimate really is that you basically use skill and not strength, and you basically have to do things without ever expending a great deal of energy, which I don't know if is ever possible, but I guess that's the sort of like the ultimate, basically, is never to get out of breath and just sort of be able to elude the attack and counter and put in your own attack without really having to struggle. But I guess that's something a skill level we all aspire to, but
It does just take getting out of those 20s, I think. I think once you get out of the 20s, man, you're okay. If you're still training at that point, you get into your 30s, you get the technique that doesn't require you to overcompensate as much with athleticism. Yeah. Where you're not getting crushed all the time, because that will also feed into the ego and make you want to fight a little bit harder. But when you can rely on your technique, and then if your technique fails you, not freak out and spaz out or overcompensate now with explosion. Because I have students that know how to relax now, but then the white belt or the new person will come in and pass their guard, and then I see them going ape shit all of a sudden. It's like, you're good. You don't need to do that. Why are you freaking out? Because it was a little moment of eating humble pie maybe or something, and then for a second that they decided to freak out, and then someone's hurt.
I eat humble pie all the time, so I don't feel the need to freak out.
It's my favorite flavor, man. It's my favorite. It's good for you, everybody.
That's right. Yeah.
It's good for you to lose.
To this. I can, just like Captain America, I can take this all day.
How often do you train when you are doing? What do you try?
Well,
what's the goal?
Okay, I think when I first started out, it wasn't too bad. It's maybe on a really good week, I could train maybe 3 or 4 times a week. But nowadays, with kind of all the stuff I've traveling been doing and some niggling injuries, then not as much as I should be. But I really want to get back into it. I've been inspired by the SEA Games. Nice. So I want to, get back in there, compete for my slot on the SEA Games team.
You get some FOMO watching all those guys compete, is it? You're like, oh, damn it, I could be in there. I could be in there. I got to get back. That's cool, man. That's good.
That's a whole different level.
Hey, I'll tell you what, watching people compete and train, though, you're just like, I want to get back in there. No, that's good stuff, man. So you're a blue belt. You say, how long ago did you get your blue belt?
I got a year ago, but I really haven't done myself justice this year, done the sport justice this year. I haven't really trained enough at all, and that's with setting up working on the business and real, life.
It's a long game, man. It's a long game.
Right,
don't rush anything, because jiu-jitsu is always around. You know what I mean? If you want to get your black belt, 10, 15 years, it's a long game. So, you still got time to stick around and keep training.
Yeah, I think so.
You were telling me earlier that you popped your knee doing a knee slice or something like that, right?
Yeah. So it's one of those things.
Is it a complete tear in your meniscus?
No, it's just partial? A small tear. So, I mean, I haven't got any. Sometimes when you tear meniscus as well as pain, you get this sort of sensation of locking or catching where you can't fully straighten.
That's what mine does.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I found it difficult to squat for a few weeks, but things are actually really improving now. I've started to do some strengthening in the gym. I plan to see a good physio, and that's the way you should do it, basically, rather than rush into surgery, for example.
Oh yeah. How long ago did you do that?
About a month ago.
So it's pretty
5 weeks. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
what's the time window like? If you do the right things, you come back, you take a conservative approach.
About 6 to 12 weeks sometimes. Yeah.
So a couple months.
It can heal up. Yeah.
Nice. And you always recommend. I always recommend to my students to do some weightlifting, light weightlifting, not like crazy shit that's going to make them sore, because I'm an enemy of soreness. I don't want my students to be sore. Soreness keeps people out of the gym. So again, Farasa Hobby talks about this, and he's right. Like, you shouldn't lift. A little soreness is okay, But what you want is overall mat time, overall reps. So if you're in the gym, like you should do, again, it's that perfect level of difficulty. Do enough that it's challenging, but not so much. If you can't do so many squats that you can't walk the next day, you're not going to go to training. Right? A useful analogy is like, okay, if you want to do, let's say you want to do some pull-ups, you're going to do pull-ups every day. Well, if I do like 20 pull-ups at once, I'm going to be so sore the next day that maybe I can't do pull-ups for 3 days, right?
That reminds me of this. I've had a couple of athletes now who basically have just gone crazy in the gym and tried to do like 200 pull-ups or whatever in a short space of time. They've developed a condition called rhabdomyolysis.
Oh, yeah. I've had that.
Yeah. Well...
Pete Brown. I did.
Yeah.
When I was training for my last fight, I went to the bathroom and like Coca-Cola was coming out and I was like, what the hell is this? I was like, this cannot be good.
Yeah, but in rare cases, it can actually, be fatal. So it's quite because what you're doing is you're working to such a state that your muscle is breaking down. And sometimes it can overwhelm or cause your kidneys to fail. So
it gets into your bloodstream, is it?
Yeah, that's right. This sort of this thing called creatine kinase from your muscles, and it goes to your kidneys and basically and you get kind of extreme muscle pain. And usually people are dehydrated, and that's one of the keys is to try and rehydrate them sort of reasonably quickly. So yeah, I've had a few of those, which is kind of that's the extreme example of overtraining. But
Yeah, the CrossFitters apparently get that quite a bit because they do a lot of their exercises to failure. Yeah. Which, of course, I would never recommend because that's, one, how you're most likely to get injured, and two, you're going to be severely sore. Yeah. And, I mean, if you do... I mean, the simplest analogy is pull-ups or push-ups or whatever, right? If I can do 4 push-ups every day or 4 pull-ups every day and you do 20 and burn yourself out and you can't do any more for the 4 or 5 days, I'm going to have way more push-ups than you in a week and then in a month and then in a year. And the overall work... is going to add more, especially if you're doing something that's technique-based, but even strength. Yeah. Even, do you ever watch the Joe Rogan podcast? You ever check that out?
Every now and then, yeah.
He had a guy on called Pavel Tsatsouline, who's basically like this kettlebell guru. Okay. That is kind of well known for bringing kettlebells to America from Russia. And he's a proponent that, he's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's a PhD. Okay. Or he's got a master's in some sort of physical exercise, physiology, all that kind of thing. And he talks about how you never want to never want to redline, almost never. He's like, the time that you redline it is like when you're in the competition. Yeah. That's when if you do it any before, he's like, the highest you should ever get is like 80, maybe 90%. And that's a unicorn, right? You do that really rarely just to see what you're capable of. But the 100%, the only time you do it is in the competition.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, I do have... colleagues, fellow people trained at Evolve who are sort of in their 60s. There's Papa Rich Wee, and his advice to be able to train kind of well into your, as you get older is basically exactly the same. You basically train up to that point where you can train the next day without aches and pains. And it's going to be different for everyone, but you've got to find that level. You've got to find out what's right for you, and then just sort of really just try not to push it. I mean, he's someone who's brown belt, nearly a black belt, who basically does weights after the class. So obviously his level's very high, but it's a good philosophy to have. It's like he's able to train pretty much every day in Muay Thai and in BJJ through kind of working on that sort of not overloading yourself beyond a certain limit.
Yeah, and this tends to be a young man's game, I would say, this kind of martial arts stuff, but not if you do it right. And I mean, there's no doubt that the benefits that you get when you're young are there, but the benefits that you get when you're older, that's when it's very important. Yeah. That Pavel guy mentioned something that I think is a really useful sort of analogy, which is like as you get older, you start to lose your fast twitch. Yeah. Your fast twitch muscles start to become weaker and slower and less responsive. And he said something that's really common is elderly people falling down. And his argument was that, of course, if you trip or something when you're young, your fast twitch is on point. You'd be able to catch yourself, no problem. But as you get older and older and older, and especially if you're not actively doing some sort of strength training or quick training, when you get into older age, that you're way more likely to break a hip, have some sort of injury.
I think there's a variety of factors involved, if you're, like you say, if you don't train your body so that you have some sort of proprioception, you're able to control your muscles, and then you don't do exercise, your bones aren't a certain density, then you're more likely to fall, and when you hit the ground, your bones are more likely to break. It's true, yeah.
And that doesn't even go into, of course, the health benefits, the cardiovascular health, and all the other benefits.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And the psychological for me.
Yeah.
I mean, if I don't train, I just feel like shit. Seriously, when I wake up in the morning, like some days I'll just have, how you fantasize about those lazy days, right? You're like, oh, I'm finally off. I'm going to do this. I'm just going to sit around and I'm going to watch TV. I'm going to eat whatever the hell I want. I'm going to do, after like 2 or 3 hours of that, I'm just like, I feel miserable.
Okay.
I just feel, that morning workout for me, that's a big one. I really feel like I'm not just rocking and rolling until I get that training in. And if I sit around and I feel lethargic, it's a problem.
Yeah, but it does. I mean, exercise does cause release of chemicals in the brain that make you feel happier. It's endorphins, dopamine, all that sort of thing. So it's a big, on the most correct conditions, is a very positive thing to do.
What kind of workouts are you doing these days?
Well,
getting in when you can.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
You look good, man. What are you talking about?
It's mainly sort of gym based. That's sort of like it. But
do you have a routine that's quite typical for you? Or?
Yeah, I do. Probably it's basically not enough legs, not enough core. Is my
just
routine.
Jacked. Just doing biceps and chest, man. I feel you.
1,000.
The bro muscles, man. That's fine. I'm not mad at you. I get
and
it.
Command.
Traps. Yeah, exactly.
Working the guns. No, I just since my knee played up, I find running difficult. But I like training. I want to get back. I want to do a bit of more Muay Thai, more striking, and then definitely sort of try and build up my BJJ as well, and try and enter some competitions later on this year.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be great.
That's the only way to push yourself and have but it's easier when you've got a target to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nothing will motivate you like somebody trying to strangle you in front of a bunch of people. Hey, you want to get a little fire under your ass? That'll do it.
That's right. Yeah. What
about dieting? Do you have like a general? Do you guys recommend the one guys to any particular thing for the? I mean, what's your take on just dieting in general and what to avoid, what not to avoid? What do you do?
Well, I don't think.
What should you do, whether you do it or not?
I don't think I'm a great example, but I think as long as you have your sort of regular mixed amounts of protein, carbohydrates, and fiber, vegetables, your vitamins, and you stay well hydrated. For most people who train regularly, it's not an issue to stay within their desired weight category, or But I think alcohol.
What about for performance or something like that?
Performance,
like the high performance. What's your take on like carbs? Are you a more of a keto kind of guy, or do you like a little bit of carbs?
Well, I like to enjoy life myself, so
yeah, exactly.
I'm probably not the.
So you're a rice and noodle guy. Yeah. That's what you're saying here.
I'm not a nutritionist. I've got sports medicine background, but I'm a surgeon. So by definition, that involves some degree of skill in red wines and kind of things of that ilk, basically. So, but I would say that alcohol is probably the number one thing that brings like a lot of people down when they're trying to lose weight, or me in particular. So
sugar will get you too.
Yeah, exactly. Sugary foods, that sort of thing. So I think a lot of it is self-discipline and sort of what you want, and definitely speak to a nutritionist or a dietitian if you do want a balanced meal plan that's going to suit your needs.
What about something like intermittent fasting? I'm a big proponent of that.
Yeah,
I tend to eat my first meal sometimes around 12, but usually around like 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I'll eat my last meal after I finish at the gym, somewhere around 10 or 11 is my last meal, and then I'll usually go somewhere between 12 and 2. So it's somewhere between 14 to 16 hour fast.
Yeah, so that's it's been proven to be very effective, all these things like the 5-2 diet, and but within a sort of, if you eat your food within sort of 8 to 10 hour window, some people eat it within a really narrow range, like 6 hours, but that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But I'm not a huge proponent of the kind of ketogenic diets, just because I think that it probably works for a short space of time, but you can't keep up for the rest of your life because it's very unhealthy, and then it's going to just come back.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of carbs too.
Yeah.
I think that diet works really good for Americans because all they eat is bread. That's all they have is bread and sugar.
Right.
So I think the keto diet tends to have great results in America, but you know, people here eat a lot of carbs, but they're not as refined and as horrible for you as like white bread, which is something that's very typical in America. Yeah. Right. And you know, here you get rice, you get noodles, but people here aren't overweight. And one thing I really like about Singapore is they really go hard on sugar. Like all of the drinks are low sugar. You can't find like there's a vending machine outside. There's no Cokes, there's no Pepsis. They're all like alternatives that are somewhat healthy, especially around the HDB blocks, around the schools.
Well, saying that, I mean, it's a sad fact that actually Singapore has some of the highest rates of diabetes in Asia, and my personal take on that is the drinks they drink at the hawker center. Have you ever tried
the Milos or something? The
Milo, and they basically put that layer of evaporated milk.
I know. I love it. I can't stop it. I love it. I can't stop it. You okay? You wanted me to get you another drink?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good.
Cheers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I, you know, having worked in, and I think it's genetic as well. There's a higher rate of diabetes mellitus in certain populations as well. So, you know, as a medic here, you know, basically you see some pretty scary things. People who've just left their diabetes and they've got kind of gangrene in their feet and all that sort of thing. It's pretty horrible. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's the condensed milk. And because even if you get like my drink of choice is the Kopi C, less sweet. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I've recently gone to no sugar. I do Kosong now, but I didn't for a while. And then I think, I think of the goop, right? Because they put that condensed milk in, and I can see that it's about that much. And then I'm like, okay, well, if I have 2 or 3 coffees a day, and then a week, and then I extrapolate outward, and I think of what the level of that. Yeah,
you probably drunk a whole bucket of
literally a bucket, exactly, a whole bucket of it, because I'll have 2 or 3 coffees a day. And then, I was like, ugh, Kopio is, I think, the move, because I'm a coffee drinker.
But what did you think about? I mean, I love the food in Singapore. I think it's incredible. It's much better than anything, because I'm British and I grew up in England. It's not exactly like famous for its food, like fish and chips or shepherd's pie. And when I was training as a doctor, all I had was like cold sandwiches or crisps and a bottle of Coke. So when I came here, it's about 5 years ago. It's like,
was that because of lack of?
That's what they eat.
Energy,
that's
just
the culture there. They have like a little shop that sells that sort of thing. So when I came here, like the food was like, wow. And I put on about 5 kilos in about a year or something like that. Literally, it just went.
But you can't say no. $3, $5. Like if you go to Hawker, you're gonna spend max like $8, and you can get a meat and some sides and some veg. I mean, it's an incredible place for food, hands down, and all the different types of food you get. It's incredible. But one thing I never really got used to was the local drinks, like the coffee. Yeah. And I think it's just a different sort of. Are you a coffee drinker?
Yeah, I'm a coffee drinker.
You do black?
Yeah, black.
Like Western style from a drip, or you don't get it from the coffee shops?
I drink anything with caffeine in it, but
nice.
I'm not.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way.
And in England they used to have these like boxes of free coffee, which were like the worst, like sawdust kind of mud type drink. But you drink it because it kept you awake and it was free. And so I don't complain, but I've never quite got used to the local coffee. I think it's because it's a different type of bean brewed at a low altitude and all that sort of thing. But that'll keep me away from reduce my risk of diabetes, because I don't usually drink that local coffee. And
you do it with black, or do you do a little sugar, a little something in there? What are you doing?
That thing called kopi siotai with a bit. I try not to drink it all the way down to where the evaporated
so
milk
good.
is.
I drink it like that too. That's the way that I have it too.
Do you like to drink that?
He's a Coke. Look at you with your Coke over there. You animal, Wugong. You filthy animal with your Coca-Cola over there.
That's right.
Smile on your face as he's like, look at this, assholes. I'm over here drinking Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Okay, man. So can I pick your brain on one more thing, and then we can get out? I really appreciate you.
No. It's a pleasure.
This is gold. This is gold.
It's fun. Yeah.
Last thing I want to hit you up on was the hydration stuff.
Right. Yeah.
I sent you a little message about that because one's doing the hydration test now, and even these UFC fights. We were talking earlier about these guys cutting weight. Yeah. They're cutting on. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. For my last fight, I walk around at like 74 kilos maybe. I cut down to 65.
Wow. Okay.
I think back then I was probably 76 or 77. I cut about 10 to 12 kilos. Yeah. So I'm kind of in that range. Yeah. But I did it the correct way, and I grew up wrestling, so that was sort of something that I knew how to do, and I wasn't. I was kind of miserable actually as I think back about it. I'm like, well, I was pretty awful and I was pretty sucked in and stuff. But anyway, they do. Actually, I saw, unfortunately, the guy died, the Chinese guy. I was in the back, his fight, before he died, and then this young Chinese fighter, I think he was 20 years old only, maybe 22 max. He passed away when he was running, trying to cut weight, and that's when they decided to introduce their hydration test. So what I really wanted to pick your brain on was the effects that martial arts, whether it's grappling, because wrestlers do it, it's sort of this thing that's all of a sudden become everywhere in combat sports that involve a weigh-in. And it's really bizarre to me because we were talking earlier about how it's a zero-sum game because the weights are basically the same because the people that are the same weight as you are cutting down about the same amount of weight. And such a sport that's so technique-driven, it's quite bizarre that this has become institutionalized. And the thing that really shocks me more is there's almost this badge of respect. People brag about it. This is the thing that I find a little weird about the wrestlers and the MMA fighters is like their weight cutting stories are almost like war stories, right? People love to affectionately tell you, I cut this amount of weight doing this. And it's this trendy thing that people like to do is talk about, I cut all this, it was crazy. And I think that's sort of a toxic problem that comes with this weight cutting culture too. But what's your take on weight cutting in general? And then like, what's the damage that you get when you're fighting on maximum 24 hours recovered from a pretty brutal weight cut? People can lose 7 kilos of water.
Well, I think, like I said before, I can't really comment on any specific policies, mainly because I'm really not involved in that sort of particular department. I tend to cover more ringside, and I don't really get involved in that sort of hydration process. And those sort of decisions are well above my pay grade. But I think that basically having it's sort of safer for people to fight at their sort of natural weight, and if you can fight at your natural weight and you're well hydrated, then I think that you will it'll be a much more exciting competition if you fight at your full potential rather than fighting at 60 or 70% of your potential, for example. I think that yes, there have been case reports from all around the world in pretty much every sort of where people unfortunately suffer adverse effects from dehydration. I
would argue that's the largest cause of death from martial arts is weight cutting, not the actual strikes absorbed in the ring. And a lot of the times those people that do pass away during a fight were severely dehydrated and had horrible weight cuts.
Exactly. Well, and in terms of the research that's out there, basically, I think you mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit about hydration. So I went out and did some research in the literature about, what about sort of hydration and kind of combat sports. And it's like, as you said, it's very prevalent. I think in surveys, people say it's like 80%, probably even higher, of people try and do some sort of weight cut using a variety of methods. And it's been known to, it's definitely proven through research to have an adverse effect on all sorts of areas, including endurance and strength.
What about your ability to take a shot, for example?
Well, I mean, it's difficult because I don't think all these things are very difficult to measure empirically. You can't really take 10 people, take 40 people, make them dehydrated, and then whack them and say, okay, how did that feel? And compare to the people who are hydrated. So,
and no one even really knows what a chin is, right? That concept of how much punishment someone can absorb, there's really no standard for that.
Yeah, so I would say that, you can, if you measure the kind of blood or, measure the urine sort of, the specific density of urine or, osmolality of the urine, then you can have a judgment to say how dehydrated or hydrated they are. But, like we said, if everybody is doing it, then why does everybody do it? Because it can only lead to, impaired performance, and it's almost like the people who are able to lose water and then recover it quickly are the ones that are going to benefit, which is not really a combat. It's a skill, but is it really a combat skill? It's a competition skill. Yeah. So is that really martial arts? I'm not really sure about that. But I would say is that, again, the American ringside physicians also have a consensus statement on hydration. They do realize it's a problem. There's And what they say is that, the weigh-in should actually take place as soon as, as close to the fight as possible, really, within 24 hours or even the day of the weigh-in, so that people don't have this sort of, massive loss of water and then think they have sufficient time to make up for it. So what they're trying to do is make people lose weight in the natural sense, through loss of fat rather than loss of water.
Yeah.
And I think we've all, in amateur fights in Singapore when I was first starting out, it's pretty shocking. You see someone who's obviously cut weight rapidly, and they basically a trainer has to sort of walk them to the ring because they're finding it hard to stand up. I mean, that's no way to, that fight should be stopped, really.
Right there.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where I'm so glad that I do work for an organization which puts its athlete safety first and has some of the most robust safety processes in the industry, if not worldwide, to make sure that its athletes are within weight and hydrated.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
What about, what would you recommend through the rehydration process? Would you water? Because, they do some people tell you to do the Himalayan salt. Some people tell you the electrolytes. I've heard, what's the Pedialyte? There's all these sort of myths about the best way to rehydrate. What's your take on all of that?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm more of a orthopedic surgeon, and so I deal with musculoskeletal injuries, torn ligaments, broken bones, and I fix those. And I basically get people in and out of the ring as safely and as quick as possible. The other areas of that particular sports medicine, because it's sort of, I'm not directly involved in that. I don't really want to comment on what is the best way of rehydrating, and that I'm not sure which particular context that refers to, i.e. before a bout or just in general after.
Yeah, just in general. Like, what about electrolytes? Something like electrolytes. Is that, I just wonder if, I've even heard, actually there was the time that I told you that I had the rhabdo when I had the brown urine.
Yeah.
One of the guys that used to train here was a doctor as well.
Yeah.
I think he was an oncologist, if I'm not mistaken. But, he was one of those guys that would tell you after the end of a hard training session to drink sugar. He's like, drink sugar, drink 100 plus, drink a Coke. Like, you need some irons and you need some this and you need some that. And I was like, and then I've heard that you shouldn't rehydrate with just regular water because you need electrolytes. And I have no idea about any of that. It's just all.
I think when someone comes to me with potential rhabdomyolysis, the first thing I do is basically, run a basic blood panel to assess their kidney function. And I think it's, and I do a panel of other tests as well. And it's usually fairly rare that they are sort of depleted in certain sort of, like, their potassium is low or their sodium is low. But generally, but if they are, if their kidneys are failing, then basically they need to come to hospital and need to be sort of intensely kind of monitored in ICU. And that's sort of a different field of specialty completely, rather than just taking kind of electrolytes. I think whatever you do, it's going to take time to rehydrate, and probably through your normal diet you're going to get, as long as you don't have an extreme diet or avoid certain sort of, minerals and vitamins, then most people will recover naturally with given enough time. I can't really comment on the process of rehydrating rapidly before a fight because basically I don't think that should happen. Yeah, and you should just dehydrate naturally, and you should lose weight naturally and not sort of and stay hydrated during the whole process. Yeah.
So the question then is, when you compete, how much weight are you going to lose?
Well, like I said, I've lost about 5 kilos through just, dieting and not drinking alcohol and eating eggs and pears. And I think I lost about 5 kilos in about sort of 3 or 4 weeks. Was quite shocking, really. What's your
weight now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 81 kilos. I'm 81 kilos.
81?
I'm probably like 3 or 4 kilos heavier than I should.
76 maybe?
I'd like to be 77, 78 basically. Yeah. I'm not with the weight categories. It's like either I go under 76 or I'm under 82, and it's much easier for me to be under 82.
Yeah.
With the gi. Yeah.
Well, Man.
Yeah. Okay.
Dr. Alan Cheung, I appreciate it, man. This has been awesome.
Thanks very much, Luke.
Podcasts are a trip, right?
Okay. Yeah. It was fun.
I really appreciate you doing this, man.
No, thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Guys, this is the Stronghold Podcast, episode 13. Dr. Alan Cheung, do you have a Instagram or anything that you want to shout out? Anything to plug?
Any injuries, please come to my clinic, International Orthopaedic Clinic in Mount Navina Hospital. And stay safe and train well. Take care.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Dr. Alan Cheung.
Okay, thanks a lot.